Over 25,000 individual buildings were incinerated in less than 5 days, generating heat intense enough to melt the church bells in their stone towers and turn lead roofing into molten rivers. This was not the result of an aerial bombardment or a modern missile strike, but a calculated act of self-immolation in September 1812 designed to deny a conquering emperor his prize. The wind roared. When the smoke finally cleared over the blackened hills of Moscow, Russia, only charred brick chimneys remained to mark where a thriving metropolis had once stood. This city does not merely survive disaster, it weaponizes it to be reborn stronger, turning ash into the deep foundations for the next imperial ambition. The story of this resilience begins centuries earlier, not with fire, but with the muddy banks of a river and a wooden fence erected in the year 1147. Prince Yuri Dolgoruki looked upon the confluence of the Neglinnaya and Moskva rivers and saw a natural fortress that could dominate the lucrative trade routes connecting the Baltic to the Black Sea. It was a humble start. The original outpost was a rough collection of timber structures protected by an earthen rampart and a deep moat, a far cry from the stone behemoth that dominates the region today. Geography dictated destiny here. Positioned at the strategic heart of the East European plain, the settlement became a magnet for merchants hauling furs, wax, and honey along the river arteries. Yet this wealth brought swift and brutal violence from the east. The Mongols burned the young city to the ground in 1238, yet the ashes had barely cooled before the sound of axes on timber signaled its stubborn resurrection. Moscow refused to die. By the late 15th century, Ivan III, known as Ivan the Great, decided that wood was no longer sufficient for the capital of a rising power and sought to drape the city in stone. He summoned the Italian architect Aristotle Fioravanti from Bologna to engineer a new Kremlin blending Russian spiritualism with Renaissance fortification technology to create a citadel that would be impregnable. Workers hauled limestone blocks from quarries near the village of Myachkovo, creating the famous white stone Moscow that would gleam ominously across the snowy plains before later renovations introduced the iconic red brick. These walls were not just defensive barriers. They were a declaration that the yoke of foreign rule had been shattered forever and that a Third Rome was rising in the north. The layout of the city radiated outward from this fortress in concentric circles, a pattern that persists to this day, resembling the growth rings of a massive, ancient tree that has weathered every storm. The true metamorphosis of Moscow into a colossal machine of urban dominance arrived in the 20th century, driven by an ideology that sought to rewrite human nature through architecture. Joseph Stalin and his commissar Lazar Kaganovich reviewed the general plan of 1935, a blueprint that demanded the complete erasure of the old feudal city to make way for wide avenues capable of hosting military parades and heavy tanks. Construction crews worked feverishly. They did not just build, they physically moved the city to suit the new grid, slicing buildings from their foundations and rolling them to new locations. In a feat of engineering that still baffles modern observers, engineers severed the foundations of the Savinskoye Podvorai apartment building, placed the entire 23,000-ton structure on steel rollers, and shifted it back 50 meters to widen Tverskaya Street. They did this while the residents were sleeping inside. The plumbing and electricity remained connected via flexible temporary conduits, ensuring that the citizens woke up in a different location than where they had fallen asleep. The skyline soon erupted. The Seven Sisters a ring of Gothic Stalinist skyscrapers designed to rival the American high-rises in New York and Chicago pierced the low-hanging clouds with their spires. The main building of Moscow State University alone consumed over 40,000 tons of steel frame and required a workforce of thousands, including German prisoners of war, to reach its terrified height of 240 meters. It stood tall. To support such massive weight on Moscow's soft, sandy soil, engineers used liquid nitrogen to freeze the ground deep, creating a solid permafrost foundation before pouring the concrete. But the most audacious project was one that ultimately failed, the Palace of the Soviets. Intended to be the tallest structure in the world, topped with a 100-meter statue of Lenin, it required the demolition of the massive Cathedral of Christ the Savior. Explosives shattered the church. The site was cleared, but World War II halted construction and the steel frames were repurposed for bridges and tank defenses. For decades, the gaping foundation pit remained, eventually transformed into the world's largest open-air swimming pool, a bizarre steaming lake in the center of the winter city. This cycle of destruction and repurposing is the city's heartbeat. Simultaneously, the ground beneath the city was being hollowed out. The Moscow metro was not conceived merely as transit, but as an ideological palace for the people clad in marble, granite, and porphyry stripped from demolished cathedrals and poured into the earth. Deep underground, architects like Alexei Dushkin designed stations that doubled as nuclear bunkers, featuring reinforced concrete shells capable of withstanding the shockwaves of a modern war. A subway train arriving at station Mayakovskaya reveals stainless steel columns and aviation mosaics, a setting that once served as a bomb shelter where Stalin gave speeches during the darkest nights of World War II. The scale of the digging was unprecedented. To build the deep-level stations, workers had to battle quicksand and subterranean water pressure that threatened to flood the tunnels, utilizing compressed air chambers that risked the bends for the laborers. Beneath the thrumming tires of cars on the Garden Ring lies a secondary shadow city that few citizens ever see, a labyrinth of secrets protected by silence and steel. The Neglinnaya River, once the lifeblood of the early settlement, was deemed a nuisance to urban expansion and was entombed in a brick tunnel in the early 19th century, where it still rushes silently beneath the feet of tourists in Red Square. Urban explorers sometimes breach. They find Victorian-era brickwork holding back millions of gallons of water, a dark mirror to the pristine streets above where the only light comes from their headlamps reflecting off the wet arches. Yet the river is the least of the underground secrets. Persistent rumors and leaked intelligence speak of Metro 2, or D6, a parallel, secret subway system built to evacuate the elite from the Kremlin to bunkers on the outskirts of the city. While the main Moscow/Metro bustles with 9 million daily passengers, this phantom network allegedly sits in silent readiness, connecting government terminals to the subterranean complex at Raymonki. We know for a fact that Bunker 42 exists. Buried 65 meters underground in the Tagansky district, this 7,000 square meter facility was constructed in the 1950s to survive a direct nuclear hit, equipped with its own air recycling systems and communication arrays to command a retaliation from the grave. Rusty steel doors seal. The engineering required to build such a facility, without disrupting the civilian metro lines just meters away, required a precision that bordered on the miraculous, involving the manual excavation of tons of earth through narrow service shafts. It is a testament to the paranoia that fueled the city's greatest industrial achievements, a hidden world where the Cold War never truly ended. Even deeper, the sheer complexity of the sewage and heating infrastructure is a marvel of its own right. Moscow operates the world's largest centralized district heating system, a labyrinth of pipes that, if laid out in a straight line, would stretch halfway around the equator. Another vertical marvel defined the Soviet skyline's ambition, the Ostankino Tower. Completed in 1967 by architect Nikolai Nikitin, it soared to 540 meters, becoming the tallest freestanding structure in the world for nearly a decade. Nikitin modeled the tower on an inverted lily flower, using a revolutionary technique of prestressed concrete reinforced with tight steel cables inside the hollow shaft to give it the flexibility to sway in high winds without cracking. It dominates the horizon. However, even this concrete giant was not immune to the city's fiery curse. A catastrophic fire in 2000 burned out the interior cables, nearly causing the tower to collapse and serving as a grim reminder of the fragility of even the greatest engineering feats. The city learned, adapted, and reinforced the structure, proving once again that its instinct is always to rebuild rather than retreat. Today, the skyline is changing again, shedding the heavy stone of the Soviet era for the shimmering glass of global capitalism and futuristic ambition. A helicopter aerial over city districts reveals the Moscow International Business Center, known as Moscow City, rising from a former industrial quarry on the Prisninskaya embankment like a cluster of crystal shards. Here, the Federation Tower shoots 374 meters into the clouds, a vertical spear of concrete and glass that symbolizes the city's reintegration into the world economy after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Construction cranes dominate. The contrast is jarring. Beneath these futuristic monoliths, the old 5-story Khrushchev-era apartment blocks are being demolished in a massive urban renewal program called Renovation that aims to rehouse 1 million people. Mayor Sergei Sobyanin has overseen the replacement of miles of asphalt with granite walkways, widening pedestrian zones and planting thousands of trees where cars once gridlocked, attempting to humanize a city built for giants. It is a digital fortress. Smart cameras equipped with facial recognition track pedestrians crossing busy intersections, feeding data into a centralized traffic management system that rivals any in Silicon Valley, monitoring everything from traffic flow to individual faces. The city breathes data. Yet even as the Moscow stock exchange building flashes with digital trades, the physical reality of the winter remains the ultimate engineer that dictates the rhythm of life in Russia. Snowplows operating heavy machinery form a mechanized ballet every winter night, clearing enough snow to bury a lesser city, ensuring the arteries of this megalopolis never suffer a cardiac arrest. The transformation is relentless. From the Zariadai Park, where a floating bridge defies gravity over the river, one can see the layers of history stacked upon one another, the medieval fortress, the Stalinist skyscrapers, and the modern glass towers, all competing for the same patch of sky. Moscow stands as a monument to sheer human will exerted against the forces of nature, invasion, and history itself. It is a place where wooden forts became stone citadels, where stone citadels gave way to steel skyscrapers, and where the ground itself was frozen to support the weight of ambition. History is heavy. Every cobblestone in the Red Square has vibrated to the march of changing regimes, yet the city itself remains the constant, a sprawling, resilient organism that consumes its past to fuel its future.